Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session and welcome sir. A little brief before starting the session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat box. I will bring them up during the presentation if necessary, or we will have some time for the questions in the end. To keep the quality of the audio clear during the meeting, please mute yourself when you are not sharing. And I am super excited to introduce our speaker. Our speaker of the day is an accomplished business leader and entrepreneur with a passion for nurturing young entrepreneurs and next-gen enterprises, focused on grooming leaders for robust growth and executing strategies. His
Yes.
specialty is mentoring incubator CEOs, managers to build robust innovation ecosystems, and coach
Hey,
CEOs of establishing entrepreneurs on scaling and expansion through the board model.
hey, good
I just,
afternoon. These people have already met me yesterday, so that's
yes, sir. Some are not there yesterday, so I'm introducing again, sir.
yeah, yeah, not a problem.
Okay, sir.
We can start probably if everybody is in.
Over to you, sir. Thank you.
And thank you for your kind words. Good afternoon again. I happen to come back to another session because this whole program was planned in such a way. I didn't know that it's going to happen right after. In successive days. But welcome back. I hope all the sessions that you are going through are as exciting, and there is something that you take away from each one of these sessions as a part of the EDP conducted by AHub in partnership with Andhra University and AICTE. So, thank you for having me here once again. Warm welcome. My name is Funny, and uh, I'm available on LinkedIn or any of these other handles. You can reach out. So what I do is work with entrepreneurs and also coach and support innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem enablers. Like the incubators, accelerators, etc. And in my day job, I run a software company. So that's about me. Welcome back, and our friend suggested, I think if there are any questions or anything that's bothering you, please keep putting your questions in the chat window, and I'll keep coming back and check these in between the session. So today we're going to talk about again three subtopics. I know that uh, some of these happen to be independent sessions of their own, but I'll try to connect the dots for you so that you will appreciate how you will see why each of these are linked to the other. And today again, unlike yesterday, I wouldn't be talking mostly about um, the business model of the incubator, but however, we'll speak mostly about startups. And as a takeaway, I'll try to discuss a little bit about how do we onboard these startups. How do we recruit the best companies to come and join our incubators or our ED cell, so to say, and how to identify these business models well in advance. Um, are my slides moving? Someone can confirm quickly so that I'll start moving into the next.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, so just a quick recap on what we already discussed yesterday. Very quickly, the definition of a startup, all of us must remember and continue to memorize. It's a company that is formed in search of a repeatable and scalable business model. And repeatable and scalable are the keywords. So many businesses are one off. There are a lot of consulting models or uh, low revenue or hyper local solutions that we normally get. But we need to identify how well they can scale, not just in the geography that they start, but also globally beyond the geography. And the repeatability comes from having innovation at the core of the startup or the company, uh, using which with limited operations, the business can uh, repeat itself multiple times over, right? So that's a company definition which we discussed yesterday. So it just starts as a small idea and then transitions into a reasonably strong business model, and they find a good product and the market fitment, and then by the time there is a cash flow, the company formation happens, and then the company executes this repeatable business and reach profitability and scalable growth stage company. So that's a transition that normally is seen, and there are a lot of pivots that happen, and many times the first idea with which this startup founder comes to us is very different from what actually works in the market, because I'll explain why it is so, right? So business is selling something, performing a service, exchange of goods and services for capturing and receiving value, right? So it's creation of value, delivering value, and then capturing value. So that's a cycle. We have seen examples of a dosa cart and an online stitching company, etc. yesterday, right? So now, what's a business model? We understand what is a business, what is a company, or what is essentially a startup. Uh, but the company's plan to make money or its creation of value and capturing the value is what is called a business model. And this is exactly how a business model is defined. And of course, yesterday we also have seen how a business model can be structured, and the product side and the market side of and then yeah, we have taken an example of McDonald's and tried to build a business model canvas, uh, detailing on the left hand side is about the product or the service, on the right hand side is about the customers and the market, and the value proposition right at the core of their business, right? But again, as we all know, and it is cliched that uh, more than 95% of startups fail, right? Uh, Usually, it is not the founder who fails, but the business model kind of fails, right? So the entrepreneur never fails, but the model uh, has very limited scope to succeed. Why? Of course, we need to identify, because as an incubator, as a innovation ecosystem, it is predominant and important for us to identify those ideas that are going to be more successful, as opposed to those uh, fire hazards. It may sound like something bright up there, but eventually, will it really sustain, or can this bright idea get its wings to fly? Those are the questions that we continue to ask ourselves. And how do we identify this game changing idea? Because it is not easy, it is very difficult, going by the statistics of only 2% or single digit percentage success. it's extremely tough to identify that winner, right? Uh, and of course, as all of us know, we need to focus on the input to get a better output than to really think that whatever be the input that we get, we will be able to do some magic out of it. It is not possible, right? So it's ego all the time. Now, the startup founders who come to us to the innovation ecosystem or an incubator are the ones who are having a lot of unknowns. That there are a lot of assumptions. uh, Mostly it is experimental in nature, and during their stay in the incubator, they keep uh, validating those assumptions or validating those ideas, to get certain and we help them to reduce those unknowns. So that's the duty and the role that an incubator plays, and so much as the mentors around them also do. But we need to really figure out, how do we pivot or quickly move from the experimental stage to a so-called success or a reasonably strong business model stage. So again, uh, as an incubator CEO or as a innovation ecosystem owner or enabler, we need to think like entrepreneurs ourselves, and we also have to think like investors, because eventually the exit happens only when the startup can onboard an investor, right? And we spoke about this yesterday also. We need to know the investor's point of view clearly, identify the quality of the team, the balance between the co-founders, and their alignment to their purpose and their vision. And then, of course, what is the gap that they have, and how to, as enablers, make this or work with the startup to fill this gap, right? Because our goal, like we said yesterday also, we want to cultivate those exceptional entrepreneurs and be able to produce those results. And hence, while recruiting a startup idea, uh, we need to focus and keep this clearly in our mind. And rest of the training programs and events and activities and efforts are all good, but eventually, like we saw yesterday, an incubator is successful if we get a startup investment, right? So therefore, a focus on the selection process is also critical. It is not just bringing anybody and everybody with an idea. It can turn out to become hazardous for the incubator, because we have lots of bad ideas in the incubator. So we may have to really create a good evaluation or a selection committee within our incubator, uh, get the right pitches, and have a proper selection criteria. And like we said, it's garbage in, garbage out. So we need to figure out, what kind of input that we are bringing into our incubators. So is there a selection process? Yes, of course. It's very important to keep a tab of. One is, that quality of the team, and identification of the gaps that we spoke about. Having a proper business model, the business scalable and repeatable, innovative product at the center of the company. So all those are, important. Plus, some of these are also essential while we are uh, looking at that entrepreneur or that founder, because, like we said, um, many of the business models fail, and the founders also pivot from what they originally thought work is going to work, because when they validate their own assumptions through those experiments during the time that they are working with us in the incubator. Um, Many of these, ideas keep changing their own shape, and some oftentimes we see that what idea with which a founder comes to us is very different from what business model actually gets funded towards the end of the journey. So one needs to really keep in mind some of these factors while selecting the founders. So typically focusing on the founder, uh, this is a 2 by 2 matrix which we normally use. On the x-axis, we measure the business acumen of the founder. How much, like we said, right, the hustler, hacker, etc., etc. But how much of a business acumen that these people carry along with them, and more importantly, on the y-axis, you also see the coachability or the trainability factor of the founder, right? So when we are listening to their pitches, when we ask the questions, when they respond to our questions while they do the pitching, or the idea pitching stage that we are when we are selecting the startups to join our incubator. These are the two factors that we keep observing and noting points. Apart from everything else, the idea, the this, the that, all of those are important, but uh, validating these aspects also becomes a real important factor for us. And why do we say that? Because, for example, look at an entrepreneur who's high on coachability and high on business acumen, the type 1 entrepreneur. Uh, of course, as it says, they probably wouldn't land at our doorstep, right? They would have already taken by they would have been already recruited by Y Combinator or somebody. So maybe they wouldn't come to us. Now, someone who is not coachable and not business savvy, the type 3 entrepreneur, there's no point actually taking them and keeping them, because they will never stick and stay. At the same time, they're not fully there, right? So it's actually good if you can give it a pass of such people. Because coachability and trainability comes through the question and answers that we normally do during the pitching session, the founders' responses and how they react to certain suggestions, etc. And it's a good idea to let them go than to select. Uh, Now there is someone who is not coachable but a very savvy business person, right? Who understands business very well, but not coachable at all. So chances of them becoming successful is, it's like a toss of a coin. We never know, right? So it's not very predictable because it is not just the mentors or the coaches in the incubator or the incubator managers or the CEOs, but tomorrow they will have to work with investors, their customers, and many other people in the stakeholders in their own ecosystem. If they're not willing to listen, or if the founder is not uh, amenable to new ideas and coachable on those, then it's very hard and difficult for this founder to succeed beyond a particular point. Maybe he or she may get few successes here and there, but difficult. Now, the best and the most useful type 2 entrepreneur that we'd like to bring in, because like we said previously, the business idea gets changed, the business model pivots during the course of someone's building a company. The idea itself might actually change, because some of the assumptions, when they validate, they find something else which the market wants, etc. But so long as the person is coachable, uh, there is a very good chance that this person or the business will become successful, because it's easy to train somebody to become business savvy and also do their thing right, than for someone who's not coachable, right? So it's the best combination that we take is a person who is coachable, high on coachable, uh, high on business savviness, also very good. We are lucky, but even if the person is not, that is still fine to bring in into our innovation ecosystem. So this early stage founder selection criteria is extremely useful. Please remember this. Keep thinking when you're listening to these pitches that come to you uh, on these two: business acumen on one axis and coachability on another axis, and keep assessing the founder there, because these are so many activities that the founder must achieve during the course of building a company, right? Starting to have a roadmap, build a team, identify the right problem, create a lovable solution, give a great customer experience, identify the market opportunities right, get the pricing and the business model right, get the marketing strategy right, achieve the traction, sustain the business, and differentiate themselves with that value proposition, and then manage the risks, and then finally get the funding strategy and the equity decisions correctly. So, all these 12 factors make up to build a company, which is a successful startup. So, when we need someone to go from one stage to another and become successful at every stage, it's important to get a person with all those factors in a founder, and also the co-founders who are aligned in the hustler, hacker, and visionary balance, right? So this is exactly what the company does. There is a problem they identify as an idea, and generate a lot of insights, experiment with a few solutions, create some kind of a offer, test it with customers. If it works, it works. If it fails, go back to the drawing board or go back to the workbench, recreate something, and finally, customer accepts a solution. Not one customer, but a few of them, and that's when we declare that the startup has a minimum viable product. I'm sure this is covered in the first or two second sessions for you, but still, a lot of businesses fail. Uh, and there's so many companies or successful ideas with MVPs fall off the grid every time. So this is a question you can give me an answer. So why do they fail? Is it because they don't have a right team or a right product, or they don't know the customer well? So what is the important factor for the startup to identify for them to become more successful? One, two, three. You can give your answers in the chat. Oh, Shivakrishan Nandiala, YC is the Y Combinator, which is the most successful innovation ecosystem enabler and an accelerator in the US. Uh, the startups which are selected by Y Combinator are the best in the world as of today. So that's the example. Okay, so I'm getting the answers. Product, team, all three. No, no, select one. Uh, Dean, FH, TM. There's no all three as an option, sir. Team, team is there, we can figure out the product and find the market. Okay. So for all the answers, I think I find only one answer to be the correct one. I think given by Madhu. It is the market. The startup is successful and only successful because they have customers or somebody who is willing to buy. And if there is no market, even if we have a great product with a great idea and which works like fantastic, as a solution, if there are no buyers, there's no business. And even if you get the best team, the rock stars from the best Ivy League campuses or, I don't know, Stanford, Harvard, blah, blah, doesn't matter if they really don't have a right market. Market means customer, right? So if there's nobody to pay, how does the startup capture that value, right? It's create and deliver value is one part of what a startup or a company does to run their business. But if there's no buyer, if there is no one who's willing to pay for it, then they can't capture the value, and of course they can't scale, they can't do anything beyond that. So it is the market that pulls out the product out of the startup. So it is not the other way around, right? So market is the real opportunity, and that's the reason why there is an idea and there is a solution. We quickly launch in the market, that is, put it in front of a customer. Customer uses that product, so-called solution, and then gives a feedback. And that feedback we listen. And if there are any changes or requests for change that the market gives us, we loop it back, the feedback into the product, take it back to the workbench, and keep working on it. That is called pivots. So this launch, listen, loop, launch, listen, loop, it continues multiple times before the product and the market stabilizes. So now, between these four, which is most important, or is there anything else? A team, the idea, the model, the funding. We know that the market is important, but is there anything else that, in addition to market, that is important? Okay, model. Business model, yes. Team is also important, yes. Idea, okay. Good. More answers, please. Funding is also critical as per Lucky Mishra. So let's see what, based on a lot of experience, of looking at startups, someone tells us. There's someone by name Bill Gross. He's an investor and an author of a book called On Investing. He studied 150 or so very successful companies and biggest failures in the US and other parts of the world, and has identified that timing is more important than team, idea, model, funding. So there is a buyer, of course, there is which is important factor, but if the product is not launched in time, or if the market is not captured in time, then the opportunity is lost. So even though we have that idea which works, a business model that is correct, a team that can deliver, and also funding, some investors have given money as well, and there is a market for it. But if somebody continues to tinker with their product and think that they want to bring something much better and better and better, and then does not catch the market opportunity in time, then they kind of lost everything, right? So it's timing that is very critical. And if any of you in an incubator or you're in the college, but this book is very good. Buy it and keep a few copies so that your startup founders can also read it. But this is exactly what it is all about. And Bill Gross TED video also is available. I'm sure some of you can go and watch it. So he explains why timing is very important with a lot of examples of companies and products that we are very familiar in the world, right? So how to find the market and how to get these customers? So it always is about finding those people whose hair is on fire, right? So who will buy? I mean, if I'm pained, if I'm really troubled, only then I put money to buy something, right? So either we find them or we just create some of them. But we need to identify the pain in the market and the desire in the market. Only then we'll be able to get the right market fit. So this we again, spoke about yesterday. Uh, One must know what the market wants, and once we get the product, it is important to launch it uh, and catch that right timing to do that than to lose the market opportunity, right? So this is a typical way of how the problem and the idea is validated. This keeps happening all the time in many of our incubators. So the problem whose hair is on fire and the idea, the product, a working model, and then we need to keep uh, hitting the market and iterate, redefine, and then pivot multiple times before it just gets the PM fitment, right? So, how many times should one do it? There is some calculation based on experience. At least 12 customers must say that they have a problem, and that is when the problem is worth trying to solve. And they should also accept that the solution that you have seems like a good solution, workable solution. And out of those 12, at least 5 of them should be willing to try it out, and one feature at least, they should be willing to pay for. So until this clicks in, we don't call it as a product, a problem and a solution fitment happened. So remember, and whenever we have these idea owners or startup founders in our incubators, the good measurement is to see if their problem is uh, existing for at least 12. So the founders must of course go into the market and research, go into the market and convince, and go into the market and get those early adopters who will pay for. So this is the only mantra for them to get their product out. And if this is not happening, and in the lab, in the workbench, they keep coming back and saying that everybody will buy it. Don't believe them unless they have a market information backing this whole wise idea they keep coming up with. So it is not the founders or few people around them who is convinced, because it is always easy, right? Who is the first investor in any person's company, it is usually uh, his or her grandmother. ठीक है बेटा, ये 10,000 लेकर जाओ, कुछ अच्छा कर रहा है तो कर लो, right? So that's how grandmothers and family will support, and they'll give some money. That's not an indicator of a success at all. It is people who we don't know, people who are not known to us, who are willing to buy and pay for it. And the early success is at least 5 to 6 of them who are willing to pay. And these are not again their own friends and known circle, first degree, second degree network, right? It is completely beyond all of those. Now, once they did all of this and hopefully achieved their product and market fit, and then the business model is sorted, and we got some confidence that this product can go into market, is when the founders team have to, or with some customer traction, can meet investors. And to meet investors, of course, there's a pitch deck or a investor deck that the startup must prepare. And we as an incubator, we as a innovation ecosystem, we also support them to develop this pitch deck. So what do we do there? How do we achieve that? So that's part of the next segment. Any questions so far, or how is the pace, or is what I'm talking fairly practical in the approach? So these are certain practical know-how that one needs to know while facing those founders and identifying the right startup ideas and getting them to work while they're associated with our incubator or our ED cell or whatever that is, right? So that they achieve all of these while they're experimenting, and they must go in the market. They must meet people who they do not know to convince them that this idea works, and a few of them should be willing to really pay for it. It could be 5,000, it could be 500 rupees. To getting a right pricing fixed is another topic altogether. It's called pricing for profits. IIM Ahmedabad conducts a course around it. But before that, at least somebody must say that they will part with their money, and that's the factor we must evaluate. And this is exactly how we fix those KRAs, OKRs, and objectives for the startup. How many customers did they meet? How many interviews that they did? How many tests, validations did they complete in a week, in a month, or whatever? And therefore, what's the result, and how are they analyzing those results and details and data? And that's exactly what happens during their stay in your incubator, right? And that's how they're getting their product and market fitment. And so now, if all this we're assuming is completed in a few months, and the startup is ready to face investors, right? And that's when pitch deck comes in. So let's go and dive into what are the essentials of a pitch deck. So at a very high level, there are three things that are required. When we're looking at investor pitch decks. One is the PPT, right? Those slides, essentials of what must be there in those slides, etc. Second is the narrative, right? We call it the pitch story. How and what contains in that narrative. and the story. And the third is what exactly they do on the day of facing an investor. How are they addressing and answering those questions from the investors? So, three things. One is the slides, pitch deck. Two is the pitch story, and three is preparedness and for the Q&A, investor Q&A. So these three things, as an exercise, one must get these founders to do not once, not twice, but multiple times, so that it is their business, and they must come up with that confidence that their product works, and it works with data backing. Who are those customers, and how did they buy, and what is it that they learned while they are selling to these customers. Yeah, Madhu, I'm not. This is just a preview on pitch deck. So there you go. What are the key slides in the ideal pitch deck? Of course, the value prop at the top, uh, and what is the problem that they're solving? What is the size of the market, and how are they solving this problem? And what is the secret sauce in their product? And what is it that they're doing to solve this? And what are their revenue sources? Which are those early customers that they got? And is there any further traction that they achieved? Are more customers buying their product? And what is their go-to-market strategy to expand that market? And of course, what is the team behind this entire business? And what are the numbers, right? The revenue sources, the expenses, and how is their financials currently? How much are they spending? How much are they collecting? What are they doing with the money? How are they spending? Was there any previous investment or a grant? And how did they utilize such investments or grants? And of course, what is their competition? Who else is in the same line of business? And what are the entry barriers that they're creating for their own business, so that competition it takes a longer while to enter into their market? And finally, the ask. How much do I want? What will I do with that money? And what is the utilization? And how do I return their profits back? And of course, the 13th in the baker's dozen is the appendix, which has the financial statements. If there's any demo or their market research, what they learned from the research, or some data from defining the market size, etc. And if they have any partnerships, if they have any testimonials of customers, or their exit strategy itself for the investor. And of course, it's a good idea to also have a one-page summary of this whole thing. Quick to read, like an executive summary sheet. So this is what contains in an ideal pitch deck, in a perfect pitch deck. Like the star noted information says, not necessarily in the same sequence. It depends on how the founder is willing to narrate the story, right? So this is exactly how it is, because the investor actually is looking at a very high level view of the market, of what they know, and the presentation has to demonstrate the knowledge of that landscape, and how much they are convincing this investor to look at them amongst so much of opportunity that they have to invest through the interactions that they're going to do with this investor. So the whole deck and the presentation must bring these things out in a very dynamic and a powerful way. Because many of these investors meet a lot of uh, startup founders on a daily basis, right? And they make their decisions very quickly within the first few seconds or minutes of interaction with the founders, and rest of it is only their validation of their first impression. So it's always important to know that the investor makes up their mind whether to go ahead or not to go ahead, and rest of the interaction of 10 minutes or 20 minutes or Q&A of 15 minutes or 8 minutes is all about validating their own original assumption. So the founders must understand this very clearly. And so what does it require? Uh, and this is exactly what happens, right? The goal of the founder is to get the investor to say, I want to invest. Now, investor, because they're meeting so many of them, and they'll hide behind those many questions and try and keep challenging the founders all the time through those questions. But how do we really, get this hook and convince the investor? Uh, First off, it is not about the deck. At the same time, the deck must have all the details and the appendices with all the information. But uh, it is not just about the deck. Uh, the founders should not be seen as somebody who is stuck with the deck, than to actually someone who is passionate and being able to explain uh, their value proposition and why the investor should invest in them in a very clear and a compelling story, right? So this we already have spoken about, but again, if you look at it, um, each one of these slides that we make, one must have a purpose of why we're making that slide and what is it that we wish to convey through the slide. That's very critical, and this landscape and the traction and everything that is required in those 12 different slides, one must explain in a sentence through their story, right? And I normally suggest the founders to make not one but three different investor decks, right? One is for a very small 10 to 15 minute interaction, where in the first 5-10 minutes itself they're talking everything, right? That's a uh, one of the pitch deck formats, and the narrative and the story for it. Then there is a very long, an hour kind of interaction one-on-one with an investor. This happens not in an early stage, but this happens in a little growth and a late stage investment area, and that's when the material or the deck itself, one will have to spend close to about 30-40 minutes on it, and then a lot of questions and keep going back and forth on the pitch deck to explain the same again and again, right? Then there is a event kind of a pitching session where there are a lot of investors, and then we may have to present kind of a teaser within the 10 minutes kind of a thing, where 5 to 7 minutes is given only for the pitch, and rest of the time is for questions and discussion. So this is exactly the three kinds of decks that the founder must be ready with. And essentially it is good to have a lot of pictures, not words like this, should not have busy slides on them. Yeah, everybody keeps saying, less is more. Uh, and and the point size, is very important. Look at the fifth point there in the tips. Investor. So it's here is a rule for the font size in a presentation. The average age in the room divided by 2, as I say. So if investors are usually around 45 to 50 years of age or 55 kind of age, then it is 24 or 25 point size is important because from a distance they should be able to read it well, and which means with such uh, large sized lines, the number of slides may increase, but therefore, if there are only pictures to talk and very less content on it, it is good to read and understand. And remember, the founders should not spend more than a minute on each of the slides. So that's essential, so that the content is moving, because it's easy for people to read their slide very quickly, right? And it's a good investment to also bring in a professional to do the graphics, or they do it themselves, but graphics are essential. Now that's about the deck. Uh, there are a lot of
मेरा बेटा लड़का है, वो लड़की जैसा लगता है.
uh, Shivan,
अच्छा,
Dr. Deepika, are you wanting to say something?
लेकिन बाद में आपको रिलीफ मिलता है.
बहुत ही वेट करता है. मैंने 2-3 दिन डाला वो मतलब और उसने उसको बढ़ा दिया मेरे उसको जो था.
So
Sorry for the disturbance, sir.
yeah. Thank you for muting. This professional graphics and designers, there are dime a dozen. There are many of them. We can always find them in every town and city. In a educational ecosystem or a college atmosphere, I'm sure a lot of students might want to come and intern with the startup to do this kind of good-looking presentations. So it's easy to get them, right? Now for the story. So one is the deck. What has to be there in the deck, the essential slides, and how to write those lines, and how to develop those deck, and the 2-3 versions of pitch deck, right? Then post that, like I said, it's about telling a story, right? So how do we narrate? How do we practice this narration? And what should the narrative be? Yes, it's not a PowerPoint PPT, right? So business plan means what the founder is talking about. And again, it's not about the individual, but it's about the investors. Because when we're meeting investors with a pitch deck, investor pitch deck, we're actually selling them an opportunity to invest in the startup company. The founder is not going there to sell their product, right? So many of these founders do a classic mistake of trying to sell their product and talk a lot about the product and a lot about the solution and all of that. But unfortunately, the investors has not come there to buy their product. So they need to differentiate. It is important to give a story or a narrative about what the solution is all about. But investors come there to invest in the startup, because investing in this startup is a big opportunity for growth. What is happening there? The investors' money grows if the company grows, right? And that's essential in the narrative, and founders should really get that very clearly from the beginning of meeting the audience. So these are a few tips for the narrative. Uh, the investor should be convinced that the problem that the startup is solving is worth solving. It's a big enough problem to be solved, and therefore, the story has to be such compelling when it comes to selling the problem, right? And then what while selling about the opportunity to invest, it is about the team, the vision they have, the traction they're achieving, uh, through the first few customers, etc. And of course, how well is the technology solving the problem. And always avoid buzz. Our acronyms are known to us. The technology that the company knows is specific to them. It is not necessary that the investor is also as technically savvy as the founders are, right? Some more. We need to know about our presentation so well because even if the deck doesn't work, right? If for some vague reason the presentation slides are not moving or there's a technical glitch of some kind, uh, the founder should be adequately prepared to be able to narrate the story, even if there are no slides. And so that's all about how much experience and expertise the founder projects, uh, and because of that expertise that they have to solve a particular problem, which the investor is already convinced that it is a big enough problem, is the reason why investors are going to trust the founders can solve it, right? So this is some more information about how the narrative should establish uh, and deliver that so what kind of a aspect, and how much uh, the investors can validate their own original assumption about the startup and the company, and how did the founder also learn from the customers and what they did to pivot. And so many of those credible information is required to establish the right connection with the investors, right? So it's all a very essential to keep transmitting those ideas through the way in which they're narrating their pitch. Okay, so one must be prepared for any such situations. So it could be no slides and then discussion only. So what's my storyline going to look like, and what's my narrative? Uh, if I have to really show my slides on a tab or a laptop sitting next to the investor, what, how am I going to narrate my story? Uh, and then different models of how this presentation is presented, and how are my narratives going to change. So these are also the preparations that one needs to do while narrating the story. Now the last aspect, like I said, is about the day of investor pitch, right? When when the actual D-Day arrives, what is it that I'm going to do as this founder? I have my deck ready. I'm confident that the slides are kick-ass and they're going to really work. Uh, then my narrative and the story is there, and the founder or people, the co-founders who are going to present, have prepared themselves adequately in any type of setup of the presentation. But still, on the day of presentation, there's some amount of preparation that the investor they need to do before facing the investors, right? So first and foremost is knowing the investor. One needs to know before going to the meeting who they are and what they are, and where they've invested previously, and based on that, if there is any customization that we wish to do in our deck, uh, minor changes, so that we establish that connect correctly or hook the investor right. So yeah, here is about the quick hook, right? It is the first few seconds in which we grab the attention of the investor, and it could be the college that they went to, it could be anything that we know about that investor or their preferences or their investment theses or where they have invested previously. Any of those details that we know through our own research, and how do we use in the hook that we establish with the person there, and how is my opening going to be, uh, and yeah, so we shouldn't use so many words like what I'm doing right now. So look at this slide, it is so busy with so many words, and a pitch deck cannot be like this. So which means one needs to know which is how do we really hook the investor with that first opening statement and the vision and their story, right? And then the references of people that they commonly know, or any of those, right? So these are a few essential pitching points that one needs to prepare prior to going to the investor meeting. And some more are here. Like I said, the connect, the humor, uh, and whether they're too fast or too slow, or how is the audience liking what they're telling, and how they're narrating. So all those points are important to be uh, kept in mind and prepare before the day of pitching. And then it's a good idea to, in fact, we used to suggest if there is a pitch investor presentation happening at a particular venue, we used to ask these founders to go to the venue, see the place, uh, identify where they're going to stand or whatever, and get the tech sorted, whether the projectors are working, what is happening, or at least even if we can't go there, uh, get to know of the person on the other side, so that we get these details clarified well in advance prior to the meeting, and the connectivity, the internet, so everything around it, right? Even after reaching the venue, it is good idea to go ahead of time and then identify these aspects. Uh, and of course, about the dressing, the how do our posture, and what we do, and how do we speak, and the expertise, the confidence, the passion, and the preparation for all those questions which the investor might ask, right? So how do we get these questions? Of course, when we are narrating our own pitch deck, and we do some mock sessions with uh, other investors or people around in the incubator or somewhere, to the mentors or somewhere, there will be certain questions that will keep coming up, and make a note of them, and prepare answers and the right answers for these such questions. And So that's what is a key to great presentation. It's all in the people, right? It's all about the team. Like I said yesterday, also investors are not investing in balance sheets. An equity investor is investing in the promise and the opportunity which the startup is giving them, right? And hence, uh, it's okay to send a business plan in a PowerPoint if prior to the meeting, if it is possible, right? All of those, and uh, the dress code, the body language. I'm just repeating these, and also the authenticity through which they deliver the presentation. Now, many people and founders have this stupid habit of finishing their presentations just the last minute or an hour or previous day of their investor meeting, which is actually a very bad option. So never ever do that, because if we end up fumbling with the slides or with the information that is there on the slides, investors will be able to identify that it's not so authentic, or they get someone else in the team to make the slides, and they appear in front of the meeting, investor for the meeting. So all of these are not good practices. They are bound to fail, right? Yep. So what are the 10 pro tips? Uh, yeah. So like it says, watch your count also, because the investor might listen to it and get bored, and may not find this whole thing to be as authentic as someone is saying. And also, yeah, don't look over your shoulder to read from the slide, or don't apologize for slides not coming up, etc. Have your own, be yourself. That's what we keep telling them. And look at the last line: practice, practice, practice. So that's something that is very essential before any external investor presentations or investor pitching. So one must spend a lot of time and efforts to make it right, and that's the story. And that's all about what they're supposed to do. So like I said, practice, practice, again. There's no shortcut. Presentations can never happen on a fly. However, and how much ever confident, or you know even if they have done it hundreds of times, doesn't matter. It is important to practice again for every audience, because it is the audience to whom we are selling an opportunity, and not selling our product, right? So these are the stages of how the presentations are done, and how successful an investor presentation can become for any founder, right? So that's all that I have planned for this session. I hope it made sense. Abhimanyu, you raise your hand.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my query relates to a team of pitchers in which the main decision making does not pitch enough. What sort of impression it uh, uh, it has on the investors? So, I recall an example of, I was watching Shark Tank India, wherein there were two set of teams: the pitchers or the marketing who were marketing the products. They were not uh, 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 not showing a great example to the investors. Like, what is there any mismatch, the what we want to present to the investors, when we are not the CEO is not himself pitching?
So it's not about the CEO or the CTO or which co-founder has to pitch or whatever, but someone who owns a company and who has been there all through the journey, and who understands what problems they've gone and faced while building that company, etc. Who else can be more authentic than the co-founders themselves, right? Even if I hire a good marketing head for my startup, and I think because the marketing head is coming from, say, an IIM or a Harvard University, therefore is more confident and can pitch my company to an investor better than me. Maybe I'm just a Osmania University graduate, and this fellow is a Harvard grad. Uh, but will the new CMO be as authentic as I can be about my own company? Can someone talk about uh, the lived experiences that I will have on my behalf? Is it a possibility? So, when the investor is investing, they're investing, like we said, in the team and in the people, and the potential of that particular team to deliver the promised opportunity, right, to the market. Now, when that happens, that authenticity, of course, comes because of someone who is already lived the whole experience of building that company. So that's my take on it, and it is important that the founders get involved. Um, they may point at a CMO or a CTO or someone else for answers to specific questions uh, by the investors, but it is good and essential to actually do the pitch by themselves, right? So, if you had seen any of the quarterly results or the company's investor meets that happen, take an example of Wipro, since we all know Wipro very well. Premji does start the investor presentation first. And then for all the questions related to finance, he will point at uh, his CFO. For all the questions related to market, he will point at his marketing head or sales head and stuff like that, right? Why does this happen? Because the investor wants to see the owner's commitment to the business. So that's exactly what investors always are interested to see. It could be a few slides. It could be the original story of how I started the company, what happened in my journey, what I learned through my startup journey. All that is something that I explain and then say, for my market opportunity and the growth. My CMO will talk about it. For all the financials in the next years, my CFO is going to respond to it. About the product, my chief product officer or the chief architect is going to talk about it. Stuff like that can always be played out. But without the CEO or the owner or the founders of the company not wanting to talk, uh, why should the investor get convinced? That's my long answer. I hope it answered it.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a follow-up query also. So, uh, one of the I saw an incident wherein the investor fails to pitch his product efficiently, but he pitches himself very good, and the investors want to invest in that particular entrepreneur for the future startups, maybe. So, what is your opinion on this particular aspect?
No, I think so. You just
Tech
validated.
itself failing, but the investors investing in the entrepreneur.
So Abhimanyu, you just validated a few of the points that I just spoke. So thanks for that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Any question?
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Mayur Sawan from this side. Yes. So the thing is, see, now I'll just give you an idea about the background. I have a firm, a private limited firm, having three partners, three founders. Right. The one myself is from pharmacy background, having masters in pharmacy. The other partner is bachelor in pharmacy, and the third partner is having engineering, B degree with him. Now the thing is, we have an idea about a business which is related to animation industry. Right? As we three don't have any background related to animation industry. So at any given point when we are trying to pitch the idea to the investor regarding this, the first question that comes that if you don't have any idea, you don't have an educational background related to that field, then how you are going to get into that specific field. So how we should be tackling this point? We had an answer that we have a personal interest in that specific field that we are trying to get into and the product we are trying to develop. So how we should be tackling this question?
No, it's actually specific to how the story is narrated and the specific investor who is looking for people with experience and background from a specific domain or an industry to be starting the company. It may not repeat and happen every time, right? So if the animation solution, I just don't know your business model and whether you have customers already or not, because what clarifies to investor is uh, the founder's journey of building the startup. If it is just an idea that you're pitching and asking for money, maybe some such questions might keep coming up. But if there is already traction in the market,
Right.
or if there are customers who are willing to pay for what you are developing or delivering, then it hardly matters, isn't it? So to that extent,
Right.
if some IIT graduates are building a fintech product and selling it, like take an example of Razorpay or something, I'm not too sure if any of those founders have come from finance background in the beginning. So, things like that. It is all about customer traction and customers, voice of customer that the investor wants,
Right.
not necessarily
Right.
just the pitch, right? So it's not always the pitch.
Okay. Okay. But in our case, to be precise with the thing,
For the initial product
sorry.
development investment, initial investment for any product development or building a solution, etc. The method is not equity investors, Mayur, but it is actually technology grants or startup
Okay.
grants that are there, because that is where a product development grant can be accessed and not
Okay.
equity investors. So
Right. Technology grind or startup grind.
correct. Equity investors come in only after the product had seen the market. So if
Yes.
you
Right.
have
Right.
seen the
Okay.
entire two hours of today and 2 hours of yesterday that I spoke, if there is no market, then there is nothing. It's just a wise idea.
Right.
So why will
Right. True. Done. Thank you, sir.
So, over the years, have you seen any particular trend in terms of, gender being a particular gender being successful over the other in entrepreneurship, or a particular gender having more deeper sense of an idea or conviction on the idea and the ability to succeed?
Not necessarily. So, the function of outcome or a success, Dr. Malai Goy, is like we said, there's a very single digit percentage of success that happens in building a startup and a company. And to that extent, even if 100 of them start, there may be only a handful of them towards the end of it, at the success. So, in the number of people who are starting itself, if the gender is not or a particular gender is more in numbers, then at the end of this traction and success, it is even more difficult to find any other gender which is not even started up in the beginning. So what we normally say to increase diversity in the gender of this successful founders is to ask more and more people from different genders also to start up first. So it is all about how many of them are starting up. It is not about how many of them are successful. So it's important to first ensure that we send more and more women and people from other genders to start first, than to say that there are not too many women who are successful or other genders are not being successful. So in that context, I think all of us can help promote and encourage people from other genders also to start first. So that's I think where it all begins. Success is the factor of what happens through the gender.
Right. I think from the institution level, we can start with, promoting and helping girls come ahead with that.
Yeah, irrespective. It's about education. It's about everything else, right? It could be politics. It could be leadership. It could be corporate jobs. It could be anything. So if there are not too many women starting up, then the chances of success is further limited. And same is the case with age. There's another question related to age by Lucky Mishra. So uh, there's no such thing. It's only a context of how many of them at 40s starting up. So, it's in the mindset. So, and unfortunately, if you see the trends, a successful startup which achieved a lot of traction and also a lot of investment and have grown is a founder who is started little late. Uh, Naren Murthy started up when he was 32, and so is the case with many of the successful founders, right? So even if a founder starts early in age, just right out of college or something, um, their first venture may not be all that successful. They would have learned a little more during the first couple of ventures, and the time that their actual success happens, they would have already crossed that early age barrier and become a little middle aged when they started the most successful company. Look at Paytm. Vijay Shekhar Sharma also started Paytm when he was a lot more older and wiser. I hope that answered the question. There's a long question from Suman. This is about the formal sector startups and their business model. Could you please give some tips about the informal sector entrepreneurs such as grassroots level entrepreneurs who fail a lot. Grassroots level entrepreneurs don't fail a lot. They are successful, and there are many ecosystems that are willing to support grassroots level innovations and startups. Only thing that is not fully there for them is the nature of the model of their business itself. If it is largely hyper local in nature, does not have repeatability and scalability of the model because of whatsoever reasons that their innovation cannot go beyond a particular market, then we won't find them so often in the highly successful ventures lists. But that's all about it. So it all depends on the grassroots level entrepreneur to find a model that is repeatable and scalable beyond that geography or beyond that particular community of people that they're trying to solve it. So if it is highly operations and tactical led model that they have, then the impact that they create is going to be limited. If there is innovation or technology at the core of the innovation, the solution that they develop, then it is easy to expand, and the scope can, the impact can go beyond a small geography. So many of these social entrepreneurship or grassroots innovation entrepreneurship ecosystems are asking the entrepreneurs to look at how they can enable technology or enable certain innovation in their own models, using which they can scale faster and go beyond a particular geography. So that's the essential for any entrepreneurship to scale and become repeatable. So it is not just grassroots-led innovation, right? I hope it answers Suman. Thank you. So I was still looking for a slide. I wanted to show you. I hope I'll be able to find it. Just give me a minute while I'm searching for it. I think we still have time though. There's half an hour at our disposal, and I'll probably show you something very quickly so that you'll appreciate it.
And good evening, Fani Garu. This is Ravi Ishwarapu, just to came in too. Thank
Hi,
you a lot.
how are you?
Oh, pretty good, sir.
Thanks for bringing us here. I hope we are able to do justice to what we all started up.
No, the Q&A sessions is a sort of a dipstick thing to measure it really. And I can see that it's going pretty well, which means that you've been able to make a big impact on the people listening.
That's a good validation, and thank you. In fact, I breeze through the slides because there's so much that can be spoken. In the topics, we are actually putting a lot of things combined. So, I'm trying.
There's some level of overlap, I know, session to session.
And I'm also trying to limit the number of slides to be able to take up questions for our people. So I'm just trying to figure out, there is a I got the PPT. I don't know if I have shown this yesterday also. So just to reiterate some of the questions that came up and to answer them a little more precisely, I hope you are able to see my slide. And I keep coming back to this slide quite often, because in the incubator, in the innovation ecosystem, unless we apply the first principles of ourselves thinking like an entrepreneur, whether we are a scientist or a researcher or an academician coming from a background of not being an entrepreneur previously, but one must continue to think like one, and also think like an investor, because these are the entrepreneurs are the people that we are dealing with on a daily basis in an incubator, and investors are the people who are going to give these entrepreneurs exit. So to that extent, I think these are the two mindsets one needs to create while running incubators or innovation ecosystems. So I'm sure all of us know this funding cycle, and there is, I think, a session which already covered this. But many of our early stage startups don't even make the cut in the timeline beyond that break-even point itself, right? So some of the FFF, who invest as a seed capital. I'm sure all of us know what is this triple F, right? It is. Anyone want to take a shot at it? What is the triple F who invest in a very early stage idea or a company? You can type the answer there. I was briefly pointing to it. It's a family, friends, or fools, I could call it. So only these are the three people who initially pitch in a small seed capital, even before the angels enter into a startup. And some of these companies never even make the cut and cannot come out of that valley of death, as they say. But if then these ideas and startups keep scaling from the first to second to third investor and moving from early stage to later stage and IPO and all of that, that's a success, right? So it's a very long, meandering, very difficult journey, and that's one of the reasons why 98% of startups never make the cut, right? So these are certain fundraising buckets or the map, how funding happens. So someone was asking about a product development in animation, etc., and that's when I thought I'll show this slide. There's a lot of R&D funds, grants, or fellowships, or small early stage prototype or product development funds that are there, which click in from many of the government bodies and education institutions and other programs that are there, which fund this particular stage of development of a product. Then I think from there we get to these trials and some experiments and early stage validations of customers, etc. And that's when your angels and the seed money clicks in. And of course, there are corporate accelerators and government, some of the large programs, global venture programs also that exist. Or even, some companies get into raising some debt from the market, soft loans here and there. So all of that is the stage where customer validations are happening. Then when it comes to really having a commercial production, market traction, sales happening well, is when your VCs and the venture capital money and the PE money clocks that starts clicking in. So this is and I think at the top you will also see the Indian rupee in terms of value buckets. So this is exactly how it can happen, and therefore at the at each and every stage we need to find an appropriate funding vehicle, and at a very proof of concept or a basic prototype stage, we can't think of getting angel funding or a VC coming and funding that company. So it's unnecessary to actually go and work in the wrong place because we don't get that money so easily. And which are those bodies? Some of them are listed here. I'm sure there are many more, and many of the educational institutions will know this DST or BIRAC or these fellowship programs or many of these government programs that are existing. And these are, I think, how we need to figure out which stage we are in, and therefore what is that money that we can get. And at every incubator, at every innovation ecosystem, there will be some person who is well versed with all these programs and how to apply for them, and they'll have different time in which we have to apply a particular program, and each year they keep announcing these new grants and new money, and then the incubator managers will be able to help us get a little more understanding of those programs. So that's, I think, I wanted to show a little bit more because I'm sure in your funding session or startup financing sessions it is covered, but to connect to the stage of the startup and the company, we need to get an appropriate funding agency to back at that particular stage of the startup. So that's the last point I thought I will also add in addition to the topic. So that's all from me. I can give it back to the organizers if there are no any further questions.
Hello.
Yeah, Mayur, tell me.
Yes, sir. Sir, I don't know, should I be asking you this or not? But the thing is, whatever slides you have shared with us, whatever presentation you have given to us in the last 2 days, to be frank, that is going to be work as a guiding light for all of us who is working in academics or who are willing to start the startup or something. So the one request that I can have from my end is, can you please share these PPTs or something with the organizers, so that those will be available to us while planning and working with all these things.
Yeah. So most of the details I have
Be done, sir,
presented.
please.
Mayur, and also all the participants. The complete information that I presented today is available in the public domain, and I'll be sharing my slides. I haven't really created any of these myself. Just downloaded and kept them in a specific order so that for the topics we can have a flow.
Right.
But yes, I will share these decks to the organizers.
So, just one last question as you leave us. Do you think the for startups is quite conducive for Indian entrepreneurs as of now? And can you compare it globally? Where do we stand?
I think there's going to be one such session going to be spoken by Varun of CII.
Varun Aknoor, the CII Center of Excellence guy. Yeah.
He'll be talking about different ecosystems and what's happening in each of these ecosystems, be it India, global, at corporate level, at educational institution level, at government level, etc. So you must attend that session. I don't want to take the thunder away from Varun's session, but each ecosystem is different in a way. For example, I live in a place called Hyderabad, and it's a constant competition, that Hyderabad always has been facing for the last couple of decades, is that we're competing with, say, Bangalore when it comes to technology companies or the software industry, etc. But each of these cities have their own DNA and their own way in which they have grown, where they have what has become the reality for these cities. So in my personal opinion, there's no reason why one needs to compete with another city because, for example, just taking the software development business part of it, Bangalore has grown from where it started because companies in the telecom and Texas Instruments kind of semiconductor and engineering companies have started business in Bangalore, and therefore the colleges have started training those students to meet the demand in the market, and therefore a lot of engineering talent is built over the years, over the decades in Bangalore city. Whereas in Hyderabad, from beginning, there was first company was Microsoft, and the rest of the companies that followed have always kept services business and back offices and customer support work in Hyderabad. Even the Google's or Amazon or any of these top five internet companies that have come to the city have only kept their customer services or maps kind of work here. So to that extent, all the colleges or the talent development institutions have produced talent which is with a services mindset for over decades, a few decades here. So long story short, Hyderabad can never compete with Bangalore in terms of how it has grown and the DNA and the nature of work that came in the software sector. And similar is the case with startups. One state, there may be a good idea to have a healthy competition between states, but the way in which those cities have grown, the way in which the markets developed in those cities or in those geographies are very. Uh, it happened over the upbringing of the market has its own history. So one cannot go back and rewrite the history. For example, India traditionally is a trading kind of a country, right? So we had spice traders, say later, all sorts of trade happening in this country. So our mindset continues to be trading mindset. Now, are we a manufacturing company? Can we just compete China and become a manufacturing hub? We probably may or may not. Or can we get a great engineering happening like a Germany can do? We may or may not, right? So similarly, Silicon Valley is another place where something else happened for them. And can we really, become that? Or if we keep giving names, Silicon Valley of India or whatever to certain cities, is it going to be valid? I don't know. So these are the things which happened over a period and happened over a years. We have DNA and upbringing also, and therefore each one of us will have our own typical journeys of how we become what we become. So, but we are definitely moving fast. We are breaking a few good records in the last couple of years or so, and therefore there is a positive vibe around what we're doing in the startup ecosystem. But there are many more problems to be solved. Someone asked about grassroots level problems and the rural and other areas. So we have a long way to go for the size of the country that we are, ma'am. I hope it answered.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that.
So no point competing. I think we need to identify what we are, and we need to build and develop based on what we are. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Should I hand it over?
Sir, could you please share your email ID, please?
Oh yeah, I'll type it in the chat for you to pick it up.
And it's funny, there is a question from the divided AP sort of stuff, Bhimavaram. I don't know, Sivakrishnan Nandyala. It must be either from Vishnu or SRK or Bhimavaram.
Oh, let me just see the chat once. Any insights into divided Andhra Pradesh for small towns like Bhimavaram? There's a lot happening in Bhimavaram, is what I realized. So,
Yeah, true. It's an innovation hub. A lot of
yeah,
agri-tech stuff happening out there. I've been to both these places, Vishnu and as well as SRKR Bhimavaram. Both are, I think, have a pretty good standing with respect to innovative this thing, especially student startups. But being a tier 3 town, I think that's the question which what made Mr. Shivakishan is coming from.
no, in fact, I've always, at least, I come from Andhra Pradesh, the state that is now Telangana that I live in. But for a very long time, I was thinking Bhimavaram is one of that towns which has people who are more entrepreneurial than any other place. Not even Hyderabad, Vijayawada. There may be traders, but Bhimavaram for me is like Kerala in the country, right? So everyone is an entrepreneur in Bhimavaram. So they build businesses. They do very well, and SRKR and Vishnu institutions, like you mentioned, I think they're doing excellent work in education and startup innovation at student level also, I'm sure. But of course, for markets, one needs to move out of towns like these because the business has to scale and the business must go and become global in nature. So to that extent, I think people will move to larger marketplaces to operate. I think that's essential and that happens everywhere. So many of the startups which get funding or the unicorns that happened prior to Darwin Box, which recently is named as a unicorn, have launched their business in Hyderabad, but moved out to other cities. When they really had scaled or become much bigger and larger. Similarly, some of the companies which started in Delhi would have moved to Bangalore because they wanted technology talent, or companies started in Bangalore would have actually gone to Delhi because they wanted a larger market for them to grow. So these kind of things keep happening all the time. But we need to continue to produce good founders coming out of the town by training and giving them good inputs.
If I can add to you, Mr. Funny, with your permission, because okay, Shivakishan, like as Mr. Funny was talking about, every region or every location has its own inherent advantages. The IT advantage to Bangalore and other stuff because of the ecosystem that's already been established. I think there are two sectors which Bhimavaram probably is I can designate it as the aquaculture capital of India. So that's where all of because I have my customer and a what do you call it, a joint venture company with which we were developing some ERP for aqua processing firms, Sandhya Aqua. They are one of the second largest shrimp exporters from this region, and most of their source is from around that area. So that's one area where you can look, because we are already working on IoT solutions for them, RFID or IoTs, cold supply chain optimization and digitization, some analytics on that stuff. Then agri. These are two things that you can really look at, which you could probably start off because you have direct access to those markets that are prototyping and ability to validate your products right on the right at your doorstep, and then maybe take it to the world. And as you grow bigger, move to those bigger towns to, especially for funding and being able to have that visibility across the globe.
Absolutely. I think agri-tech is really big. Agri-tech and aquatech is really big in that region. And see what the student entrepreneurs or the idea owners who come to us need is an access to the market. So if there is a method of identifying good customers for them to go and study the problems and identify those problems which are big enough to solve by taking certain customer inputs from the local ecosystem is when I think they can really grow fast and big. Because agri tech, if they, it's a paddy cultivating region, right? West Godavari and East Godavari districts, many of these districts around Godavari river belt and Krishna river belt. Now, if they have a good solution that solves some problem which these agri owners or farmers were having, and Vietnam, for example, or Indonesia, or some of these other countries, there are a lot of paddy growing countries. So they can get a global scalable models by doing research and validation in a place like Bhimavaram. And for example, West Bengal is also a big paddy growing market. So that's how these solutions can be connected. But for experimenting, validating, and getting their product and the solution fit, they can do a lot of work in a place like Bhimavaram to solve certain problems in that space, either aqua or agri, as Ravi Garu had told, right? So that's, I think, a very important aspect of how we can do. And lastly, I think the part 2 of that question is a little political in nature. What is to do with the government or whatever? I don't want to get there, but entrepreneurs always operated independent of which government that is. So government plays a very minimal role in furthering entrepreneurship. So entrepreneur sees a problem in the market, and therefore they're deeply moved to go and solve that problem with a particular innovation. To do this entire journey, I don't think we had come across any government requirement in any of this startup journey. So if Bangalore is thriving, it's independent of the government that is there. Silicon Valley, US is thriving, it is independent of who is ruling that country or that particular state. So it doesn't really matter. Government has a very limited role to play in furthering entrepreneurship. So that's my last, and these are my contact details. Somebody asked my email ID, I put it in the chat, but you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn or any other. And thanks for your time. Back to you, my dear friend from AU.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And thank you for such an insightful information about the business model of McDonald's and the 12 important critical success elements, types of entrepreneurs, and a detailed explanation about the market data and Baker's dozen, a pitching, how to impress the investors in many ways. And very thankful for being interactive with our participants and explaining the concepts with the logical examples. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Fanigaru. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ravi sir, and bye-bye everyone. All the best.
And we have come to the end of our day too. And I would like to thank everyone who made this possible. And I also thank today's speakers, Mr. Kiran, Mr. Anudeep, and Mr. Fani, for their valuable presentations and insights. Thank you all once again for coming. Jai Hind.